Amnesia as a series is generally regarded as a pioneering and shining example of modern horror games, and for good reasons. Despite the somewhat bumpy road of its entries and its flanderization by early YouTube Let's Plays, it has made a name for itself as one of the best executions of Lovecraftian horror. That being said, defining what the core gameplay of the series should be took a while to take what I personally think is its best iteration. With the Chinese room's A Machine for Pigs leaning more towards the walking simulator and Frictional's own Soma taking the same direction, although to a much better critical reception than the former, and Rebirth's reception being very mixed compared to The Dark Descent, it could have been tricky for Frictional Games to reiterate on the franchise, without clarifying what its core gameplay strengths should be. But if anything, The Bunker shows that what they envisioned for the series is very well defined and can churn what I can't describe as anything less than a work of mastery. The Bunker came as a big surprise for me with the relatively recent release of the previous entry at the time it was revealed. On top of that, it was announced as being a major reimagination of the series with more focus on replayability and freedom of approach when it comes to threats and puzzles, as well as a non-linear style of storytelling. Suffice to say, my interest was piqued, but I was also very apprehensive. I wrongly assumed at the time that this was going to be a detrimental approach to Frictional storytelling that was very accustomed to linearity so far. And I'm very glad to see how wrong I was. The most succinct way I could describe this new iteration in the world of Amnesia would be that it's a thrilling chapter of the most brutal of wars that instills a paranoia anytime you leave your safe room to engage in an immersive game of survival against an insurmountable threat. Despite this entry being the very first time we're given a firearm in an Amnesia game, the tension could not give less of a shit when the monster barely gets scared by your bullets.
I'ma beat your ass.
It manages to cram in a couple of hours one of the most engaging horror experiences with its intricately designed monster and world, which is a breath of fresh air not only for Amnesia as a series but also for the horror scene in general. Amnesia: The Bunker brings us closer to real-world events than we have ever been before. Now, instead of a fictional country like Germany or the very real French colonies in Algeria, this one takes place during the First World War. The famous war that would end all wars plays directly into the narrative of the series, being one of the main plot points of A Machine for Pigs. Our story takes place in the titular bunker, located somewhere on the 1917 Eastern Front, where the French and German armies got to peacefully discuss the border situation. At this point in time, the French are pretty low on morale due to the casualties suffered so far, and our own morale is about to take another blow. We are put in the shoes of Henri Clément, whom you can get familiar with in the trenches as your tutorial. We are on the verge of dying from German mustard gas when our best friend Augustin Lambert comes to our rescue.
Get this up fast, fast! We're dying on me, Henri. We make it out of this hell together. Then follow me. We're nearly there.
Some time passes before Lambert is sent on reconnaissance and fails to return. Henry goes searching for him and finds his friend in a giant crater. But the two of them are ultimately spotted by German troops and shot at while escaping. Despite not being an expert at damage assessment from mortar shells myself, I think we're dead. But surprise, we get back up with all of our limbs intact. But we are very much alone in the infirmary, both physically and mentally, since, as you guessed it, we suffer from retrograde amnesia. So our first steps will have to lead us somewhere we can get our bearings with the locals, or what's left of them. The place has seen some havoc, with furnitures knocked all over the place and holes puncturing the walls all across the bunker. Making our way to the kitchen, you're finally greeted by a friendly, although badly beaten up soldier.
Thought I was the last one.
He tells us that the officers that were in charge of the place abandoned the rest of the garrison and trapped them inside the structure with a beast they were supposedly running away from, blowing the exit shut on their way out. As our nameless friend rightly suggests, the only way to get out of here will be to blow another hole, and the tools to set up a charge are scattered in different parts of the bunker. After this summary introduction to how bad our situation is, our only friend so far asks to mercy kill him before the beast gets to him first, and he gives us a service revolver to that effect. We have but the time to go in and out of the pantry for ammunition before our fellow army man is torn apart by the monster. marking the beginning of our loneliness until the end of the game. In just this short introduction, the bunker lays all its cards on the table. The plot itself is deceptively simple compared to its predecessors. Instead of a grand narrative about otherworldly rituals and redemption like in The Dark Descent, you get exactly what the premise promises. We're tasked with escaping a bunker if we want to hold on to our dear life. Suffice to say, Frictional had their priorities straight with this one, but that doesn't mean you will stay short of world building and details about the people that used to be your comrades. Although this retains the oh-so-familiar way of learning about your coworkers from the bloody note they left on their desk, I find it to be much more grounded here, given that journaling was a very sensible and necessary thing for soldiers to do while trying to retain their sanity. As we will discuss later, Bunker is a bit shorter in experience this time around, and I'm not going to shy away from telling you you're embarking for a roughly 4 to 5 hour long playthrough. Given the price tag, make of that what you will, but I would argue that this more focused approach is far from a detriment to the experience. Instead, it feels more straight to the point and intimate, more so than some quiet moments in The Dark Descent that could become a drag, although you can also argue I have French bias. But I will rest my case and say that Bunker never overstays its welcome and gains in the intensity of its horror. To back this point, we have to take a closer look at what Frictional games changed in the formula. Since I have yet to play Rebirth for myself, I'm mostly going to compare this to Dark Descent, but the former doesn't seem to have strayed too far from its forefather from what I've heard. Most of Amnesia revolved around light resource management and puzzle solving in a physics-based environment, inherited from the Penumbra series. This time around, Bunker introduces more interactions with your environment, besides the Newtonian basics we're accustomed to. Everything you do in-game is subject to making noise that will attract the monster this time around. Light remains an essential component to your progression, but you're not as hindered as you used to be when plunged in total darkness. Instead, the game presents it more like a trade-off. Your main concern centers around the inventory and resource management and how you prefer to spend them. The safe room lets you access a Resident Evil-esque storage box as well as a generator that powers the entire bunker. You can fuel and turn the machine on for light aplenty, which will drastically reduce the odds of the beast coming out of its holes at the slightest door creak. But you will have to keep track on the time you have left one way or another. Alternatively, you can choose to shuffle around in the dark with a manually powered flashlight, or absolutely nothing, in hopes that it will make you quieter. These mechanics are not revolutionary by themselves, but manage to feel fresh. Bunker does a great job of instilling a fear of running out at any point. It also manages to make the player feel conscious of their own presence in the world much better than any other entry in the series, and most horror games out there, to be fair. Turning the generator on means you might run out of resources without the guarantee that you will have the means to power it again. But braving the darkness might have you miss the safety of light that keeps the beast at bay and allows you to easily spot objects of interest. However, playing it safe with all the accommodations the game provides, like the pocket watch, gun and flashlight on hand, means you might be missing the necessary slots when you find something interesting. The strength of the game resides in the moment-to-moment dread you experience as a consequence of your own decisions, something I feel would not be as comfortably achieved if it was stretched over more game hours than it is here. I particularly enjoyed how cautious Bunker made me feel about every step. You see, I behave like a hoarder, as in most games with resources. I do not use what the video game provides and stockpile it in the safe. As a result, I almost never used the generator and would instead tread in pitch black corridors, stopping at each and every grunt, creaks of wood, or whenever seeing a puff of dust coming from a fissure. Between that, the noise you have to make in order to progress, and the other environmental sounds, I think it's a real success to shift the perception of the player so that pressure comes more so from the mechanics than from the giant creature that is out to maul you. You will have to choose if picking up a rag and bottle is worth the Molotov you could craft with it, or if you expect to find a key item around the corner. Speaking of which, your main way of acquiring said items will be to forage among the belongings of your fellow soldiers to find the code to their locker on their dog tags or the place they left their tools at. You will have to get your hands dirty if you want that lighter. And explore this bunker you shall, because you're only given partial information about your surroundings at the start, and the only way forward is confoundingly far forward. My brethren Francois may have told me that the dynamite is in the arsenal and the detonator in the excavation site, but that doesn't tell me how to get there and where to look once I do. In order to do so, you will have to look everywhere for bits and bobs in order to craft your way through situations quietly, loudly, at your leisure. The advantage of this being a somewhat short experience also means you are not very likely to get tired of exploring no matter the difficulty mode you're playing on. The procedural generation of loot is still paced well enough that you will know what to do and what to use when you get to the blocked pathway. You're always free to come back and spend your newly found tools, and the rewards will still be waiting for you. And despite mostly being there for story flavor about your fallen comrades, the written notes left around also serve to create an organic suggested path of progression, so that you never stay clueless about the next thing you should be doing. Of course, it would hardly be worth discussing the bunker without talking about the star of the show, the Beast. As you're now more and more common horror game stalker, the Beast serves as the main threat hindering your progression and as the plot motif. As far as this kind of enemy goes, this one is on the higher end of well designed, but that doesn't mean you won't be able to fight back. What you have to look out for are ways of escape, or if you have enough resources to fight it off, as it will get more pissed as you keep pushing back, and you won't be guaranteed to always fight it off and retrieve new resources at the same time, forcing you to retreat to the safe room to replenish. The safe room acts as your only real safety in case you're being chased. It is a bit cheap for players who want to experience the most amount of pain possible, so that's why you will be able to disable the safe adjective once you completed the game one time. Other than that, what is there to say? It's a traditional frictional monster in that you cannot look at it too long without hindering yourself. Here, looking at the threat means you're wasting precious distance you can put between the two of you, because that thing can run fast and kill you even quicker. So your best bet is always to be on the move. On top of that, it isn't constantly tailing you like the xenomorph from Alien Isolation would, meaning you have a chance to encounter it more naturally when something else decides to make some noise, or just in the off chance that it wanted to feel some fresh air.
I'm very hungry.
While we are talking about that aspect of staying fresh, the bunker was developed with the focus on creating an experience that never plays the same twice. There are some elements of RNG for you to experience in your first playthrough, such as randomized locker codes and loot, but I believe the options you unlocked in custom mode are where the real randomization plays out. With Shell Shock mode acting as an ultimate difficulty, you're also allowed to tweak some other options, such as the frequency of traps, the aggressiveness of the beast, its unpredictability, rats, and much more. Before these options were added to the game, I remember feeling like it could suffer from you knowing too much about it, like how the creature follows you. So I feel like Frictional went in the right direction by allowing you to tailor your experience to your likings, and I see no real reason to go back to the standard options on your subsequent runs. Bunker also steps its game up from previous Frictional games. It doesn't look like your average 4K ray-traced grabfest that only runs on a €500.50 machine, but it looks impressive. Of course, it has its modest shortcomings in the form of human models and facial animations ending up on the uncannier end of the spectrum, but these occurrences are so rare that you won't be paying attention to it in the grand scheme of what is otherwise an excellently animated game. Provided you won't be staring at the monster too much, but you will still feast upon the plethora of animations for each items that you use, which contributes to the grounded feeling you get here more so than in any previous titles. The groundedness also comes from how intentional and accurate the world is depicted, with all the equipment lying around not just being wooden boxes and trash. The realism is in the attention to detail to World War I equipment, and it makes for an all the more effective depiction of the period. That compliment extends to the environment, with sceneries and an atmosphere I will let you experience for yourselves. Small spoiler for a specific location of the bunker. One of the greatest examples of the developer's success manifested itself to me with the pillbox. I was on my way to finding a path into the communication room when I happened upon this ladder that took me closer to the surface. I was genuinely in awe the first time I came up there because of how relentless my escape from hell had been so far. It was a breath of tranquility until I nearly died from a heart attack at the bullet's impact on the shutter. Stafford wasn't so lucky. A brutal reminder that the way out of the bunker still leads to the real horror happening outside. Graphics are very cool to talk about, but what about the sound design? That aspect has always been handled with special care in every Frictional title, and it's no surprise that it's the case here once again. From soundtrack to effects, everything contributes to creating the sense of danger you will have to get accustomed to if you want to progress. The soundtrack doesn't strike me as being as ominous as it's felt in The Dark Descent, but I believe it dictates the tone just as well, and occasionally provides some relief in the instances such as the safe room. It's also generously included in the game's files as playable tracks. The way the physics are handled in the game pairs greatly with the soundscape, managing to hit that sweet spot of making you feel like you're making way too much noise while moving a barrel or slowly opening a door. You'll also get to enjoy the most realistic experience of firing a gun or standing near an explosion I have seen in a game, which really sends home the impact of actually being there. The rest of the ambience also plays a big role in instilling that paranoia I was mentioning, with the punctual shelling happening on the surface, rumbling all the way down, as well as unique noises that populate the different sections of the bunker. You can't always be certain that what you heard was as innocent as it sounded, which is what I want to hear in my horror game. However, this is the part where I have to note some of the technical issues to be encountered, with the ones mentioned here still being in the released version at the time of this recording. From the developers themselves, the frame rate is capped at 60 per second due to the physics engine, although you can manually edit that out of the game's files at your own risks. It is a well-optimized game most of the time, but you will inevitably experience a jarring slowdown when you transition from one major section of the bunker to another, no matter your hardware from what I could test. I would have preferred that they kept the artwork or quotation that used to act as a loading screen in The Dark Descent or Soma, which I find to be much more graceful than a freeze. It is a minor gripe that only I may have. Unfortunately, I can't extend the same courtesy to physics. While remaining one of the core elements to Frictional's game design, I found it more frequent to happen upon quirks that interfered with the experience. This is most likely due to the sheer quantity of objects lying around this time, but it's not uncommon for something to get itself stuck in a wall after being moved. This also extends to ragdolls if you engineer a situation that calls for one. There were also some issues with achievements triggering on my side, but that about concludes the little oddities I was able to encounter. Things have improved since the initial release, but some are probably too minor to dedicate attention to. And I also find it honorable how Frictional Games still takes time to publish modding tools for their games. Granted, it is a long-time staple of the studio. I remember The Dark Descent having some great mods, and I wouldn't be surprised to hear from some fine ones in Bunker's case in the future. Overall, I would conclude by saying that Amnesia the Bunker is a definite recommendation if you like survival horror with a touch of immersive sim. Many of the complaints I have seen stem from the game's length, which I reiterate is about 4 hours long, perhaps 6 if you really take your time. I have tried to make it clear during this review that a game's sum of intensity is much more valuable to me than its overall duration is. Although it can understandably hurt to spend a large amount of money on a game as short as this one can be, I would advise it to take into account the efforts it takes for Frictional to put out titles like that, especially after Rebirth, which could have been a tremendous leap of faith. Additionally, you can't just wait for sales if you're hurting financially. So I would encourage you to purchase a copy of the game, which is available on Steam, GOG and Epic Games, and oftentimes at a discount, as I think Amnesia the Bunker not only embodies what the horror scene can and should be encouraged to produce now and in the future, but it's also a great title that many other mainstream games could take inspiration from.